Hello, everybody. It is just about time to get started. Hello, and welcome to Gut Transitions webinar. I am More Than a Diagnosis, the impact of personal identity on healthcare transition for young adults with special healthcare needs. I'm Mallory Sear, for those who don't know me. I'm the Youth Program Manager for Gut Transition, the National Healthcare Transition Center. In just 1 minute, I'll review the agenda for today and introduce our guest speakers. But first, I want to share some more information about Gut Transition and our webinar. Next slide. So we first would love to thank our federal funding from the cooperative agreement between the U.S. Maternal Child Health Bureau and the Center for Medical Home Improvement that helped sponsor Gut Transition and put on these events. And as a national center, we sponsor quarterly webinar series and also a monthly radio show on topics pertaining to youth and young adults' healthcare transition from a pediatric to an adult model of care. All these broadcasts, as well as the episodes of the radio show, are recorded, and you can access them either from our website, guttransition.org, under broadcasts, or as a podcast on iTunes, or newly on our Facebook page where it says broadcasts. We would love for you to share these resources and pass our website on to others. Also, after this webinar, you will be shown an evaluation that you will receive at the end of today's broadcast, and we would love for you to fill that out so we can get some feedback on how we're doing and what you thought about it. Next slide. So before we get started, I do have a couple of notes about today's webinar. There will be a 10-minute question and answer period after our guest speakers and panelists have spoken. If you do wish to submit a question or a comment, please do so in the question box on your screen on the control panel. You may do so at any time during the presentation, but we are going to hold all the questions we receive until the end. At that time, I will read as many questions as possible and get responses from our speakers. The questions we may not be able to get to will be answered and documented and posted on our website within the week. So please don't be upset if we don't get to your questions. We will make sure that we comment on all the feedback we receive during today's broadcast. Next slide. So for those of you who are not familiar with Gut Transition, we would love for you to come visit our website and learn more about our aims and initiatives. In brief, our goal is to support and improve healthcare transition from pediatric to the adult model of care. We are addressing this need on behalf of youth and young adults with and without special healthcare needs. We support several learning collaboratives that are made up of pediatric and adult provider sites in Washington, D.C., Denver, Boston, and New Hampshire. All of those are working to improve their practices, healthcare transition processing. Again, please visit our website to find out more and the other things that we're working on. Next slide. And with that, I would love to introduce our speakers for today. Our featured speaker is Dr. Susan Waisbren. Dr. Waisbren is an associate professor of psychology in the Department of Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School and the senior psychologist for the Metabolism and Genetics Clinic at Boston Children's Hospital. She received her BA from Yale University and her Ph.D. in clinical psychology from the University of California, Berkeley. She has focused her career on addressing the needs of children and adults with metabolic and other genetic disorders. Much recently, she has co-directed several projects on transition to adult health care for youth and young adults with special health care needs. She is delighted to participate in this webinar, especially since she is sharing the panel with experts who are living with these conditions, and since you are listening and able to contribute as well. We are also very excited to have two incredible young adult panelists on today. Liz Kennerley, who graduated from Simmons College in 2009 with a BA in Society and Health. She currently lives in Pennsylvania, but her heart is always in Massachusetts. She hopes to return to Boston very soon to further pursue her dream of working as a child life specialist, and she is currently taking classes to help her reach that goal. Dylan Marcy is a 19-year-old college kid with Ellis Van Creveld syndrome, a rare form of dwarfism. He is currently studying at Colorado State University and majoring in biological anthropology, with hopes of going into forensic anthropology in the future. Next slide. So this is our agenda for today. Our guest speaker, Susan Waisbren, will provide a presentation on identity achievement. Following that, we will hear from our two panelists, Liz Kennerley and Dylan Marcy. We will then take your questions and comments for discussion. After this segment and in conclusion, I will be sharing some of the resources available through Got Transition. Next slide. So today's topic, the impact of personal identity on healthcare transition for young adults with special healthcare needs, is a very important subject. It is part of the transition that often gets overlooked as we tend to discuss the checklists and assessments and various parts of the actual procedure of transition. I personally was able to hear Dr. Waisbren present this material last year, and I finally went, yes, this is exactly what we need to be talking about. This is what young people are experiencing. So I am so excited that Susan is here to share that content with us today. And without further ado, I will turn the presentation over to her.
Thanks so much, Mallory. I'm, as I said before, delighted to be here. So the title is I Am More Than a Diagnosis, Identity Achievement. Recently, I worked with a young man with a metabolic disorder called PKU that required him to follow a very restrictive diet, to take numerous blood tests, and still come to Boston Children's Hospital for checkups. His distress and confusion could break your heart if you did not understand the psychology of transition to adulthood. He is 23 years old, and I'll call him Adam. I've known him since he was first identified by newborn screening and watched him grow into an intelligent, handsome, and kind young man. He's been on treatment almost his whole life, except during the 4 years of college when he ate anything he wanted and didn't feel so well. After college, he resumed treatment at our hospital, but did so half-heartedly. He wasn't sure it helped. He recently moved in with his girlfriend. He holds down a low-level job as a clerk in a discount store. He came to see me because the dietitian realized that he was depressed. In counseling, he confessed that he had no idea about what he wanted to do for a career. He wasn't sure if he wanted to stay with his girlfriend or if he wanted to even stay in the state. He literally had an anxiety attack when trying to write a cover letter for a different job application. The more we talked, the more I realized he did not have any hobbies or special interests. He did not exercise. He did not have a favorite food or favorite color or favorite book or favorite movie. When I talked to him about transitioning to an adult health care provider, his eyes glazed over. In other words, his identity was tied up with his diagnosis. Not every young person with special health care needs resembles this young man, and yet the picture is extremely common among adolescents and young adults in the general population, that is, not having a strong identity. The problem for him and for you is that you may face far more serious consequences for health than your peers who don't have health issues. So what is going on, and why is it so hard to make the transition to adulthood and adult health care? Next slide. I have come to believe that transition to adult health care is a psychological rite of passage, and the key is understanding that the primary psychological task that must be accomplished is identity achievement. And to do that, you need to embrace life in all its vicissitudes. Next slide. Vicissitudes, huh? It's actually a great word. It means a variation in circumstances or fortune at different times in your life or in the development of something. Experiencing life in all its vicissitudes means taking the chance to live life fully with all its ups and downs. Next slide. So today I will talk about identity achievement, focusing on the need to explore as a first step. Then I'll talk about life's vicissitudes and strategies for using these experiences as you establish a sense of identity. According to Erik Erikson, a famous psychologist, developing a sense of identity is one of the primary developmental tasks of the transition to adulthood. Erikson talked about identity synthesis or identity achievement as opposed to identity confusion. Next step. Next slide. So a strong sense of identity is linked with all sorts of good things: a positive self-image, positive social relationships, health-promoting behaviors, good citizenship, And I'll add self-advocacy, which is very important. This means the ability to speak up for yourself. Next slide. On the other hand, a confused sense of identity may lead to problems, especially depression and anxiety, or drug use, or sexual risk-taking, rule-breaking, lying, physical aggression. These are all things that can happen when people don't have a sense of identity. Next slide. More recent work by people interested in identity theory has led to the sense of identity achievement and confusion, and about steps toward a sense of identity that kind of falls in between these two extremes. These authors in this study surveyed over 9,000 college students ranging in age from 18 to 25 years, and they found 5 categories that were linked to how young people behaved and took care of their health. Next slide. So these are the 5 categories. The first is the achieved identity. This is what we call the gold standard. These people had a firm but flexible self-definition. They had explored life and were now able to commit not only to a career path but to relationships and to their interests. In a sense, they had an overall sense of themselves. Next slide. Coming before that, or what they called was the second stage, was called foreclosure. This means that the people had strong commitments, but they hadn't really explored options. These young people weren't particularly anxious because they knew who they were, but when they were confronted with changing circumstances or life's vicissitudes, they had a much harder time. For example, they may have decided to become a lawyer early in life. This was fine until they failed to get into law school and then fell apart. They had never explored any other options or considered what they might do when confronted with that challenge. Next slide. This stage was called searching moratorium. And I should say these aren't necessarily stages, but sort of periods in one's life. And you can kind of go back and forth between them. But the searching moratorium stage, it was what most people went through as they were sorting through possibilities, but not quite able to commit. This can be a difficult time, although probably a very important time. Most of these young people were expected to end up with an achieved identity, a true sense of what they wanted to do and who they were, while others seem to get stuck in this stage of just searching and searching. This is a time of high anxiety, but perhaps that is okay. Next slide. And this is called diffused diffusion. This is the other end of the spectrum, with extreme thinking about the future, but an inability to try new things or commit. These young people had very high anxiety. They often had low self-esteem, which prevented them from trying things, and they sometimes felt isolated and depressed. They were searching for a meaning in life in a rather unfocused way. So they couldn't try anything. They just thought about it and thought about it and thought about it. Nonetheless, some were expected to achieve their identity, but their path would be a lot more difficult if they couldn't get out of that sort of home movie going over and over again. The next slide. And this is the last stage, the carefree diffusion. This is the most difficult stage. These are people similar to those who can't commit, but who don't even worry about it. There's no exploring. They're not worrying about the future. They're not thinking about it. They're not committing to anything. And these young people have the hardest time because they may be self-destructive. Underneath, there's probably low self-esteem and depression. Next slide. So this slide shows the 5 identity categories on the top and 5 behaviors that present health risks. And I know these are a lot of numbers, so don't worry too much about that. But as you can see, the carefree diffusion category, that one way on the right as you're looking to it, those are the people who really don't care, are the most at risk. But as you can see by the yellow rows, even the people in the carefree diffusion are not that different from anyone else in terms of 2 of the behaviors that really do present risks: unprotected sex and driving drunk or driving with someone who is drunk. While this is not very, it's the way life seems to be. So what this tells me is that your peers are taking chances with their health, perhaps as they explore life's vicissitudes and come to develop their identity. And maybe taking risks is really a necessary part of achieving an identity. The trick, though, is to have some insight into this. If you can understand that taking some risks is important, you may be able to explore and take risks in areas other than your health. Next slide. I put in this slide to show you the difference between what your parents and doctors might aim for and what I'm hoping for you. In preparing for this talk, I came across this list of requirements for, quote, adulthood, and thought not necessarily so. This says self-responsibility, deciding on personal beliefs and values. That's all great. Establishing a relationship with parents as equals, maybe possible, maybe not. And financial independence, often not so during this period of time, in this day, the economic environment. And if you have a special health care need, these goals might not work for you. Next slide. So here's that word vicissitude again. So I believe the goal is to experience and really experience life in all its vicissitudes. If you have special health care needs, you are already doing this a lot. Life's vicissitudes have certainly come to you, and this has probably changed you, but not necessarily in bad ways. How can you use what you've probably already experienced to help you now to establish a strong identity rather than just having the identity linked with the diagnosis? So there's a couple suggestions. First is to embrace the anxiety that comes with new experiences. Don't be afraid to get out of your comfort zone. This may mean finding a new doctor or new friends, starting classes again, or talking to someone you don't know. And then do your exploring, as your peers are doing, but maybe not in terms of your health, but in terms of other aspects of your personality, friendships, music, books, foods, adventures. You might also go to join other people. There's a program in Boston called Face Forward, and it's where people can get together. This program is for young adults with special health care needs who try all sorts of new things, like climbing a tree for a ropes course, or writing and performing a song, or talking about yourself in a group. These are out of most people's comfort zone, but certainly can help with that idea of exploring. Next slide. Then confront outdated aspects of your identity. Just because you were always shy, try not being shy. Just because you were always polite, try expressing your anger or disgust. See how you feel. How do others react? If it turns out badly, so what? You've experienced one of life's vicissitudes and are stronger for it. Also, seek out others who support change. It's very common for your parents and other family members to basically freak out if you change, even if you change for the better. They're so used to you being one way that a new way makes them worried. Try not, quote, telling them everything, or doing something that your family, quote, never does. Talk to teachers, counselors, doctors, or new friends who enjoy seeing you change and explore. Next slide. But choose your battles. Decide when to conform to others' expectations. My hope is that you will stick to what is healthy for you. That's our kind of expectation. And when you need to follow your own path or take a risk. And finally, engage in self-examination. Make a list of what you really like. What do you really want? If at first you don't even know what to put on that list, try putting things on the list. Try doing those things and see, is that something I like? So those are some suggestions for living life in all its vicissitudes and using these experiences to establish an identity. Next slide. So in conclusion, instead of seeing transition to adult health care as something separate and uninteresting, see it as part of a psychological rite of passage toward identity achievement. And in the process, embrace life in all its vicissitudes. Next slide. And thank you so much, and I look forward to hearing what you all think about this.
Next slide. Thank you so much, Susan, for that incredible perspective and insight. I think a lot of us, I know I was, were probably nodding pretty emphatically during those slides. And now I would love to hear from our young adult panelists, and I know that they probably have experienced many of the things that you were mentioning in that presentation. So I would love to start with Liz Kennerley. Liz, do you want to take a few minutes and kind of reflect on what Susan just said and share some of your thoughts about that?
I totally agree with the fact that having a diagnosis, like, it gives you ground to stand on. Sort of like a tall tree that's been cut in half and you're sitting on the stump, but yet, while isolated, you are above the rest of your peers because it forces you to mature more quickly. Like, I mean, I've gone to appointments on my own. I have procedures on my own. Everybody else is like, well, don't your parents go with you? Don't you have somebody with you? And it forces me to grow up on my own when I go to things on my own. Because it helps me grow, it helps me to just, like, sort of be strong, even though I don't really feel strong. And, like, having a label, labels can be good, and they can also be bad. But in the end, they do shape who you are, no matter. But you can also push them in a good way and in a bad way, because they do make you stronger in the end. The diagnosis for me, mitochondrial disease, is a whole spectrum. So, like, some of my friends have it more severely than I do, some have more symptoms than I do. But as Susan said, you just have to go with the flow, and, like, when you're down, you have to find something that brings you up, and you have to be able to, like, level out your emotions in your head, so that even though you want to be flying off the wall, sometimes you have to, like, make sure that you're level with everybody else.
Great. I totally agree with all of those points. I think that's really powerful stuff. Next slide.
All right.
Dylan.
Sorry. I guess I have similar feelings with a lot of the things that was said. I mean, it often does feel like you're so far elevated above the rest of the people your age just because of this thing that you have, that it's really hard to identify sometimes. Like the first quote up here is, "I may not be my diagnosis, but my diagnosis is a large part of what fueled the realization of who I am." I mean, without it, I would not at all be as sure, or maybe even know who I was. That's really made me step back, examine stuff, especially on the bad days like that everyone has. It's are you going to let this bring you down, or are you going to get past this? Are you going to let it make you stronger, or are you just going to let it kill you? And it's something everyone with a special diagnosis has had to face at some point, and everyone answers in their own way. But that's what fueled who I am today, like my, I guess, self-reflection and interest in finding out who I really am. It's, that whole diagnosis. And then there's always, being real with yourself versus, what society wants you to be. Not every guy can be tall, dark, and handsome, so I try. If you can see my picture, you can see that I'm besides being short, I'm kind of a dork. And, I mean, it's one of the things you just kind of got to embrace. Society tells you have to be this way all the time, 24/7. You can't have your own opinion about anything. You have to follow them to be cool, to be with the in crowd. Well, a lot of the time, people with special diagnoses, we don't have that option. Whether we physically cannot, whether there's something that is impairing us from doing that, or like me, we just don't fit in with everyone else who is, just because we know that there is, more to things than doing what everyone else tells you to do. A lot of us don't have that luxury in our lives. We don't have the time or the money to be able to do stuff other than look after ourselves, and that's, a huge definition of who you are as a person. Then there are a bunch of outside impacts. Like I was talking about, society trying to make you conform, and a lot of the time they'll try. I'm sorry, I'm stumbling over words. I do that sometimes, but they're trying to make you conform to this image that they see you, since you don't fit in with everyone else the way they want you. Well, if you don't fit in that way, they have a certain envelope for people with disabilities they want you to fit into now. And a big step in identity is realizing that you don't have to be that. Like, you don't have to be, I can't speak for anyone's personal experience more than my own, but I don't have to be, a stereotypical dwarf. I mean, there are options for me for who I want to be outside of that. You just got to look and explore. And a lot of what Susan was saying really struck home. I mean, you got to experience life and all of its vicissitudes, I think is the word, the ups and downs. Take everything in stride, do what you love. If you don't love it, don't do it. And I guess it's a hard thing to explain, but that's the best way I can explain it. You're not going to find your identity listening to other people. You're going to find your identity doing what it is you want to do and what it is you love to do. And I guess that's all there is to it.
Thanks, Dylan. That was awesome. I know that, next slide, please. I know that as I was supporting these presenters to plan for this event, we had some amazing conversations about this content and about how you do find your identity and those processes you go through. And, Dylan and I sort of came to the conclusion of like, well, maybe I will just find my own category. I don't need someone to define me. I don't need my illness to define me. I'm going to define me. And I think that's such a powerful statement. Liz also said something that really just, I think, sort of sums up this whole presentation. She said, when Susan was explaining what the word vicissitude meant, Liz laughed and said, that's the story of my life. And I think it is for all of us, maybe more so than average young adults, because the ups and downs are extreme. It's not just you have a bad day, you stub your toe, and then you have a great day and you go out with friends or whatever. It's, you can go from having surgery to meeting an amazing group of people that feel like your family, or doing really well in school, or, the extremes are just so intense having a diagnosis. And it's not just in those special events or those crisis periods, but also in the day-to-day, the daily wear and tear that I know Susan has mentioned in this context. Is just the extra challenges that we deal with getting from point A to point B, or whatever it takes us to feel like we are fulfilling our identity. And there's the part of, as Liz said, Liz and Dylan said, being far above your peers. And so before we take questions from our audience, I would love to ask Liz and Dylan a couple of questions. I know you both mentioned having those dark periods, or I call them the why me days, where you really just sort of succumb to your disability and go, you know what, this is not fair sometimes, and it's really getting to me. And so you both talked about having ways to sort of bounce back from that, and I would be curious to hear from both of you of what you do when you have those moments to come back and feel confident in who you are, or if that's something that you maybe still struggle with on occasion. Do you want to kind of answer that?
Well, I do still struggle with it, because my symptoms vary day to day to day. So there really is no constant, really, of anything in my life. So, like, when I do get down on that question, all this stuff, like, you have to focus on a goal. Because, as you said in my bio, like, my heart is in Massachusetts, so every, like, 3 months or anywhere in between I go to Massachusetts. So I always think that, yes, I'm having a bad day now. Yes, I may feel like crap. But in, like, 2 weeks, in 2 months, in 1 month, I'll be back in Massachusetts with my friends. So you can just hang on until then, I'll be golden.
Great. So having something to look forward to and keeping it in perspective, I think that's awesome. What about you, Dylan?
That's honestly it depends on my day. If it's a day where I'm just I'm down, but I'm not to the point where I'm really feeling bad. Something as simple as doing something you love. I mean, watching one of your favorite movies, listening to one of your favorite albums. I mean, that'll always pick me up. If it is something more severe, more intense, like for instance, earlier this March I went through my second surgery and major knee surgery in 2 months, which I mean it was hard, and there are definitely a lot more why me days when you're sitting in a wheelchair and have nothing else to do than ask yourself those kind of questions. And I nodded my I've nodded my head a lot at what Liz was saying. You just gotta think about the future. You gotta say, well, stuff it may be terrible right now, but come 2 or 3 months from now, I'll be walking just fine. My knees won't hurt anymore. Legs will be straight. Won't have to worry about them anymore. And it's just remembering that there's always a silver lining on any cloud, no matter how big it seems at the time.
Great. So my other question, and I know that you spoke a little bit about this, but what sort of did you either go through or experience or come to realize that made you have that conclusion that, what, my diagnosis, good or bad, whatever it brings me, it's a part of who I am? Like, what sort of things happened that made you just have that conclusion?
I think I just embraced it. I mean, it's in my genes. I was born with it. I can't change it. So if there's something about my life that I can't change, then I might as well embrace it. And I might as well, turn something that can be devastating into something positive, like going to walks, going to symposiums, meeting people who have it, so that you can sort of vent to them a little bit and have that common bond that really nobody else can really have that doesn't have anything chronic.
What about you, Dylan?
I guess what really got me to learn to just accept who I am, it was actually there was a period during junior year of high school where high school parts of it suck for everyone, but it's a lot harder when you have a diagnosis that makes you physically unable to fit in, and things get a lot harder. So I mean, junior year was the peak for me when I was going to be made or broken one way or the other. I just didn't know it at the time. Unfortunately, I can't really say what it was that helped me, I guess, just accept that about myself. It was a number of different things. I had a great group of friends. I was on my high school student council, which was pretty much a giant family. I mean, I had 35 people I could turn to if I ever needed to talk. And honestly, what did it for me, it was a little bit of growing up inside, but also knowledge of the fact that I had a massive support group out there for me who, loved me and appreciated me for who I was, diagnosis and all, that, what, hey, it may be annoying and it may get in the way sometimes, but if other people, if other people can see past it and, get to like me for me, why should I let it bother me? I mean, I don't need anything. I don't need their approval, but at the same time, it's what helped me look past the fact that, I was fundamentally different.
That's awesome. So before I personally want to ask you one last question, I just want to let you know that we're getting feedback from our listeners that you guys are doing a phenomenal job. And I just want to totally echo that. You guys have just hit so many nails on the head, and I think you're amazing presenters. So with that, I want to ask one more question before we take questions from our listeners. So at the end of the day, if you found a magic lamp that you could rub and a big blue genie would come out and say you get 3 wishes, would you change having your diagnosis? Would you wish it all away to be somebody else?
No. I would not. And I'm sure that some people are like, their jaws are hitting the floor right now. But, I would not change it. Because, I mean, the support system that I have from those who share my diagnosis, it's, the most amazing thing in the world. People who share my diagnosis, they know me better than my own parents. So, I mean, I wouldn't give that up for the world. I mean, I wouldn't like to have all the issues that I have because of the diagnosis, but I do believe that it has made me who I am. I have no idea who I would be, what my personality would be like, what I would enjoy if it wasn't for my diagnosis.
What about you, Dylan?
That's actually something I've wondered a lot. Like, who would I be if I didn't have this thing above me? I'm sorry, it's a personal thing. I refuse to call it a sickness because I don't see myself any different than anyone else. I call it a thing. But yeah, with my thing, I mean, I have done so many things, met so many amazing people because that is a part of my identity. Because I was born this way, that I wouldn't trade it for the world. I mean, I get to be right here, right now, talking to you guys, which is one of my favorite things to do, by the way. I love talking. But the reason, I'm here is because I'm this way, and the reason that I got to go to Face Forward this past summer, and, which is where I kind of got involved in this whole thing, is because I'm this way, and I met some of my best friends in the world there, and because I'm different. And it's something that when you're in your down days, yeah, you think, why can't I be normal? Why do I have to have this thing above me? Blah, 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 blah. But then the rest of the time you realize this thing has, it's opened up so many doors, like even just relationship-wise, that, for my identity, there is no alternative. It's not my identity, but it has helped shape, the fundamental perspective of who I am and who I see myself as. So, no, I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't change a thing.
Awesome. So now I want to take questions from our audience. We have a couple really great ones. The first question we have is, I would be interested to know if the young adult panelists feel they are taking a risk when they do something that parents or elders may actually consider risky. So I guess sort of what do you guys, do you feel that there's a difference in what you consider taking a risk and what maybe older people think might be risky in terms of you having a diagnosis or being more fragile? How do you justify riskiness?
Well, I mean, I don't know. Like, I mean, in my opinion, doing errands is risky because it wipes me out and I crash because of it.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yet it's my parents being like, come on, get up, I want to do errands with you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's sort of like doing errands, getting out and going with my parents shopping, that is the risk. So I feel like that they want me to get out and they want me to, like, you know, not be a hermit. But at the same time, I don't want to really do it a lot because I'm trying to protect myself from crashes. So it really depends who is, like, I guess, who is initiating the risk, I guess.
Right. So for you, it's almost the opposite, where what you actually think is risky for your health, other people sort of encourage. That's really a key point. What about you, Dylan? What's the latest risk that you've taken?
Boy, I'm trying to think. There's
That you can disclose on the air.
Hmm?
That you can disclose on this webinar.
All right. Thank you for that. I know you're giving everyone bad impressions about me. Not a bad kid, don't worry. But the biggest one, the defining, I guess, risk, quote unquote, that I've taken is actually through sports. Well, I guess I was before knee surgery. I haven't quite gotten back into it, but I was a avid martial artist. Absolutely. Sorry, my phone got a text. Avid martial artist. Absolutely loved the sport. Loved everything about it. And then I would say probably around April or March of 2011, I started getting more into actual, I guess, like fighting, like UFC, MMA type stuff. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's mixed martial arts. It's kind of like kickboxing with wrestling mixed in. And, I mean, I absolutely loved it because there's no better way to work off any aggression you might be feeling about anything than when you're, allowed to pummel someone else. Well, my parents weren't too happy about this because through my syndrome, I have a lot of joint problems, and I don't have joints in some places I should, like my fingers, and my joints aren't as flexible as other people's are in other places, so I thought that was a massive risk, but I wouldn't have quit it for the world. I absolutely loved it. Who cares if I came home black and blue? And that might be a little bit of an extreme example, but it's types like, and I mean, I think even if I didn't have the syndrome, they probably would have protested if I tried
awesome,
to.
though.
But yeah, I mean, it's that kind of stuff. I mean, I guess I'm a little bit more physical than a lot of risks I could have been taken, but at the same time, I don't know. It was just who I was. I wasn't going to let another aspect of my identity stop me from doing it.
Great. So the next question we have is, are you two able to live independently?
Well, yes. But financially, living independent and paying my own rent, no. So there's sort of like two different questions, but
Well,
Yeah,
I
I
think,
mean, like, basically, and for the most part, yes. But even though I'm living with my parents right now, I can live on my own.
I think that's a really great point, Liz, actually, and it really speaks to sort of what it means for a young adult to live independently in general in these times. And I think it comes back to having a diagnosis be only a part of your identity, whereas those are additional things you have to think about. For those of you who may know, I just moved to Boston to go to graduate school. And there's the healthcare piece that you have to think about when you make those transitions. But you're right, Liz. Thinking about finances and being able to support yourself in other ways is a whole other webinar altogether. So I think that's a really great point, and that really is a two-sided question. So, Dylan, what about you? Do you consider yourself able to live independently?
I am. I mean, the way I see it, I can do or be anything, anyone else can. I just might have to do things differently. Up to a certain point. I mean, I was in a wheelchair from double knee surgery December up till May last year. And I mean, I figured I adapted, but at the same time, it is a lot harder for me to live independently, knowing I have those types of troubles hanging over my head, and that, at any moment I might be in a position where my mobility or means to live independently, might be impacted heavily.
Mm-hmm. Great.
This is Susan. I just want to add one piece. That word independently. That word independently, I think, is a trap. Because does independently mean alone without supports? Or does it mean that you can have your identity and do what you want to do with whatever supports you need? And I would take the second definition. So living independently can mean that, yes, somebody has to come in and help me do this or do that, but I'm still living independently because these are my choices and I'm free to choose. And I think that's a really important distinction, that people think that to be independent means you don't need anybody. And I think that's a false sense of what is independent.
Yeah, and I think I really agree with that, Susan, and I think a key part of being independent is taking responsibility for identifying where you need those supports and getting those supports in whatever way works for you before you sacrifice your health and your safety. So I really appreciate you jumping in there. There's another question that I want to ask, and then I sort of want to piggyback something onto it. But this woman says how Susan spoke about advocacy and transitioning into adulthood when you suddenly have more confidence in standing up for yourself and taking things on your own. Do you have any advice for other young people with special health care needs about how they can improve their self-advocacy?
Again, I think that's much better answered by you all who have done it from everything I know about you. So, Mal, why don't you start? and then,
oh, goodness.
Yeah.
Well, again, this is something that Dylan and I were talking about last night. I think it's definitely a process. I think a lot of times people jump in saying, I want to be an advocate, or adults recommend young people to be advocates without really knowing that it is sort of a process and that it has to start on the individual level. So in terms of self-advocacy, I think there are different levels where it may begin with being able to explain your diagnosis to your peers or being able to talk about it openly even in your family dynamic. And then maybe sharing your story with other people or going to a conference where you may not originally be comfortable talking about things and sharing your story, but by the end of the week, you not only have shared your story, but you know other people's stories, and you're talking about things you never thought you'd be talking about with other people. And so I really think it's a sort of a level process about being aware of yourself, being able to share that information, and then taking advantage of opportunities that are presented to you, like this webinar, whether you're a listener or a panelist, and being able to contribute and give that information to other people. And really that's what advocacy is just getting your voice out there, sharing your story, and then learning from others, and ultimately sharing pieces of other people's stories. So I think the big thing here is not to make it a big mountain of like, I want to get to the top and be an advocate, but rather I want to have self-advocacy skills. And so really that is just speaking on behalf of yourself and on behalf of others. And so I would really like to hear from Liz and Dylan if you have any other advice. And the piece that I wanted to add as well, I know we're coming up on the end of our webinar, you both reference having amazing support systems. And I know sometimes that not everybody has that opportunity or that fortunate option. So my part B of that question would be, how did you identify those support systems, and what advice would you give to young people who may be seeking that but don't necessarily have it already?
Well, most of my support system I've never met in person because they're all on Facebook, which probably sounds somewhat sketchy. But it's the truth. I mean, like, I probably have, like, at any given time, day or night, I can ask a question on Facebook about Mito and what the heck is going on with me, and I'll have, like, answers within an hour. And I mean, so my support system is mostly people who share my condition and all of its vicissitudes, because we go through them together and we support each other. Like, I might be up, another one is down, so I can help someone who's down kind of get back up again. And I mean, so they get me more than my own family does, because, I mean, when I talk about the matter with my family, like, I don't know how to describe it, like, they seem to, like, see me as, like, sort of, like, a prognosis, and, like they sort of, like, see the meds first, and then me, not me and then my meds. And I do have friends who don't have Mito, so, I mean, like, they've seen me, like, go through the whole process, and they've seen me on my good days and my bad days. But in my opinion and in my perspective, the strongest support system is when you have friends who have been through things with you, like the whole Phase 4 crap. Like, they know what it's like to have done appointments, days on it. Like, they get what I get. So.
Mm-hmm. Great. What about you, Dylan? Just real quick, we have to wrap up almost.
I guess my answer to that isn't, it isn't as cut and dry as I look for other people with my diagnosis and ask them how they've gotten through things, how they could help. I don't know anyone else with Ehlers-Danker-Veldt syndrome. It's really rare, and even people with achondroplasia, most common form of dwarfism out there, have a much different perspective than I do, just because they don't fully see me as a dwarf since I stand at 4'10". But on the flip side, normal people don't see me as normal because I stand at 4'10". So support group for me has been trying to find people who also elude like categorization, people who are also in unique places with their life. And some of my best friends are, I don't know, schizophrenic, bipolar, just because they're in the same situation I am, where they don't know anyone else who has any idea what they're going through, and we can all relate that way. We don't know each other's exact stories, but we know enough about each other and enough about what each other is going through to really help to bring each other up when we're not feeling good. So my advice to those looking for support groups is, if you can't find someone who shares your diagnosis, look for someone who shares your situation, because I don't think anyone would know what I was going through any better than if I managed to find myself in an entire community of people with Ehlers-Danker syndrome.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really, really great wisdom, Dylan. And I want to wrap up with one last question. I know we only have a couple more minutes, and this is for Dr. Waisbren. To bring this all back around, how do you use the ideas presented today in helping to support transitions to young adulthood?
Well, I think the first step is to really figure out, what do you want to do and where do you want to go and how do you feel about things. And often that needs to be done with either friends, a support group, or sometimes a counselor. Psychologists aren't just there for when you're having troubles. They can be there to help sort things out. So I think once you know who you are, it's a whole lot easier to know how to get there. Or who you are and what you want, it's a lot easier to know how to get there. It's when it's all diffuse and you don't know that you go around and around in circles. And I think that leads to, in order to get what you want, you need to be as healthy as you can be. And that's where the transition to adult healthcare comes in, because you know where you want to go. You're exploring. You're ready to commit. And in order to gain those goals, you need to be as healthy as you can be. So that's kind of the connection between the two.
Great. Thank you so much. Next slide. So with that, I want to wrap up and just encourage you all to check out more of what Got Transition has to offer. There will be more information coming about the November episode of Got Transition Radio. You can find all the recordings of our webinars and radio show episodes on our website. Please find us on Facebook and Twitter. If you have not joined our contact list where you get emails about all our events, please do so. It's very easy. Go to our homepage, click the button Get E-News, and enter your email, and you'll be all set. So on behalf of Got Transition, we thank you so much for participating in today's webinar. I want to give a huge, huge thank you to Susan, Liz, and Dylan for being with us today. And again, we would love you to complete the evaluation of this webinar, which should appear as soon as you close the window. We encourage all your feedback. And please note the email address provided on the slide, as well as the URL to our website. With that, have a great day, and thank you so much for tuning in.